Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Crime Talk. My name is Scott Reich. Yes, we are not in the Crime Talk studios this evening. Why, you may ask? Well, it's a rainy evening here in Denver, Colorado. And Mark Carlson, who is, full disclosure, one of my probably almost exclusive investigators that I use these days because he knows what he's doing. He's prompt, and he's just some good common sense.
Thank you.
We haven't had a cigar in a while, and it's tough to do them inside the apartment or the apartment inside the studio. Landlord doesn't like that either. And then on top of that, it's raining tonight because you wouldn't believe it. But last night I got home and did everything. The lovely Miss Christian's there. Well, she goes, "What are you going to do?" I'm going to have to start a cigar. It stopped raining, and then it started again. So I had to grab an umbrella, and I was sitting out there on the patio with lightning, holding an umbrella. I know, not very smart.
You're dedicated.
So we are having a fine cigar here at the Crime Talk hangar, I guess, next to Crime Talk 1 for those who haven't seen it. But this is a good place to have a cigar, talk about the news of the event. So first of all, welcome, Mark. How are you?
I am doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Sure, you got enough dinner?
Oh, absolutely.
We ordered up barbecue, cigars, and lemonade. It doesn't get any more crazy than that. That's about the extent of my craziness these days. Lemonade. So anyway, here we are. So I said in the show that we did today, we're going to talk about the Lori Vallow case. I don't think we talked about it last time Mark was here, but obviously, if you're watch Crime Talk regularly, we've been covering the Lori Vallow matter. She was just sentenced yesterday. She got 3 consecutive life sentences. When she makes her statement of allocution to the judge, she says, I died back in like 2002 when Kylie was born. I've been to heaven and back. I've talked to these people. They didn't die. They died naturally. It was accidents, but I had nothing to do with to kill them. Very weird moment. Even her own attorney's statement, a little weird. You don't usually hear a whole lot of Bible verses at sentencing by the defense attorney.
No.
I get it. To each their own, but the reality of it is you just normally don't see that. And of course, obviously the prosecution side had the family members and designated representatives who got up to speak. And, they should have that moment to have that moment of closure for something that has literally been dragging on for years now. So we can talk about that. We can take questions. Mark and I will talk about that. And then I don't think we can ignore it. And we've talked about this before. I mean, Donald Trump got indicted again. And it's not a political thing. I've said this, whether you like Trump or hate Trump, we try to look at things from the attorney perspective, from the prosecutor perspective, from the defense attorney perspective. Regardless if somebody believes that it is a political witch hunt, whatever their motives are, the reality of it is he's been indicted. You have to deal with those realities. We've had cases like that, Mark, where people, the conspiracy, they're all out to get me. And okay, I get it. But we have to deal with what we have in front of us, which is an indictment and charges. So how can we show this is not the case? So we'll talk about that. And it's always funny because whenever we talk about former President Trump and his cases, I always get, "You're pro-Trump, I'm unsubscribing." And then I get other people say, "You're anti-Trump, I'm unsubscribing." So I think that what that means is we're going right down the middle. We're literally trying to, do the facts, and we can pull up the indictment. This most recent indictment is basically January 6th, saying that he basically tried to disenfranchise everybody from their election results and things of that nature. We can get into a little more detail of that if we have time. We'll see for that. So first of all, Mark, what are your thoughts on the Lori Vallow matter? I mean, crazy. I mean, she was incompetent for 10 months.
Well, we've had plenty of cases together where just because people are nuts or crazy doesn't mean they're legally insane, I guess, or whatever, the definition. I understand that Idaho doesn't have a insanity
Not
defense,
guilty by reason of insanity. Yeah.
But, people can be off their rocker or whatever, but it doesn't mean they're not legally able to assist in their trial and so forth. So, and then I wonder, I didn't follow it every day. I've certainly followed the headlines and stuff like that, but I have to wonder how much of that was, a lot of it sort of seemed like a little bit of an act to me.
Yeah. I mean, that was their question we asked the other day was, she delusional or evil? And a lot of people said she can be both,
Absolutely.
She can be crazy like a fox. My experience is usually when they send them down to the state hospital and they say they're not competent. I mean, they've gone through the malingering stuff. They've looked at that and somebody's saying, yeah, they're just not right. So for her to go down there, I think she's truly got some mental health issues. But just because you have, we had a case over on the Western Slope. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
Just because you have very strongly held beliefs does not in and of itself mean that you're crazy. It just means you have some very strongly held beliefs, even if it's completely different from everybody else in the world. People think that guy's crazy. No, he's not crazy. He just has some strongly held beliefs. Her beliefs are that they could figure out who was going to go to the dark side or who had dark spirits, and basically she would give the order and people would start dying.
Well, I guess kind of by definition, that's conspiracy to commit murder, isn't it?
Yeah, the conspiracy to commit.
She can give the order.
Conspiracy to commit murder as to Tammy Daybell, which was Chad Daybell's wife, and now it's her fifth husband, Chad Daybell. Which I've always joked that he never asked for a bond throughout this entire process because he probably thought it was safer on the inside. He may try to get out now, but he's got some real problems as well because we're realists, right? And let's just because we always get people like, oh my God, how can you do this? How can you represent those guilty people? All that kind of good stuff. And a lot of people think that you condone everything that your client does or anything like that. That's not the case. You're just protecting their rights. A lot of our clients will admit they made really stupid decisions at the moment, but the point is, are they guilty of what they're actually charged with or something lesser or something along those lines? But the question, as an investigator, you've told me like their story doesn't make sense.
Frequently.
And that's what we have to do, hey, this is what I need you to investigate, check it out. And like, that doesn't pan out. You just can't make up facts, right?
Well, and that's one of the things as an investigator that frustrates me the most is, we'll have a client that'll say, go talk to this person or that person. They'll tell you, I wasn't there, et cetera. And I go talk to them and I've had cases where the witness has said to me, you tell me what you want me to say. You tell me what'll help him the most.
And all you can say is give me the truth.
Give me the truth. We can't do that. And I tell them all the time, listen, good, bad, or otherwise, we need to know the truth because we're making a decision. You and the client are making a decision on moving forward based on the information that we have. So if you're lying to me and we go forward based on that information, that never works out in the end. People think it's difficult to lie, maybe if they're talking to me or they're talking to you or they're talking to the press. It's a heck of a lot harder when you stand up there in front of 12 people and you put your hand up and the judge says, do you swear? And, everybody's eyes are focused on you. It just never works out well. And then, who knows what other witnesses or information or evidence they're going to have to tear apart that witness anyway. Yeah. So it looks worse. If somebody gets on the stand and lies on your behalf, to me, that looks 100 times worse than if they would have never taken the stand at all.
And obviously the attorneys can't put somebody on that they know is going to perjure themselves.
Right.
But then there's always that line of, well, that's his story. He's always said that. Who am I to say that's not what happened? Because I've heard some crazy, bizarre stories and they turned out to be the truth. So sometimes you just never know exactly what is going to take place. I'm hearing here that Kay Vallow Woodcock. It's a great day. Want to hear Scott's thoughts about inmate 153745. And for those who don't know, Kay and Larry Woodcock are the grandparents for JJ Vallow.
Oh my God.
And in all honesty, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, and I don't know, we give her the bat line number to call in if she wants to? But that case may never have gotten started, but for Kay and Larry saying, "Where's our grandkid?" They're the ones that really started this. Obviously, her brother was killed as well, so she's had double tragedy. But I mean, I think justice was served. I think said all along, at the end of the day, you got to go through the process. They got to go, the competency, the delay, but the juries usually get it right. And you just got to be patient during this process. I mean, the case has been going on for three plus years, and we've had Kay and Larry, and I've met them in person when we went out to CrimeCon last year and what have you. And if we didn't have that other little murder trial this year, I'd be going to CrimeCon this year, but we've got a homicide trial to do. And I'm expecting you to be there. Okay.
So, I will be there.
So anyway, yeah. Hey, Kay, I think Frank is trying to send out the call-in number if you're interested in getting on. That would be great. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Obviously, we watched the sentencing that went over a little over 3 hours. I think the judge said it just right. Nope, we're going to have to hold on. This is what happens when you go live. I think there's a very large jet that is going by here for just a second. Hold on one second here. Man. See? Normally they just go by here fast. The one time you're out here, you need to be able to talk. The plane's taking their sweet old time. So yeah, so Lori Vallow, the sentencing went for 3 hours. Obviously, I'm glad that everybody got to say what they wanted to say. Lori Vallow made this weird statement that went on for about 20 minutes. We put that video up and we chopped it out so you can just see her statement, but it was just weird and bizarre. No remorse whatsoever, no acceptance of responsibility. And I understand, their attorneys told her there's going to be an appeal, so you probably shouldn't say anything like, "Oh yeah, I did it," or whatever. But I think the judge nailed it, Judge Boyce. And I've been kind of a critic of Judge Boyce through the years. One, that everything was done in privacy. I've never seen a case literally tried in chambers. Most bizarre thing I've ever seen. And I don't mean the pretrial issues. But he nailed it where he said, clearly you've got mental health issues, but you brought your kids to Idaho to isolate them so that you could kill them, to get rid of them because they were inconvenient. She found her new beau. She thought she was going to get the insurance money, but she didn't get that because of some quick thinking people. And it just, she killed her kids and then she covered it up and then she went to Hawaii. The whole world is looking. You knew she did it. And I mentioned this before. You knew she did it when the whole United States is looking for her kids and she's in Hawaii. If your kids were missing, where would you be?
Not in Hawaii.
You'd be wherever you thought your kids may be found, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's always the telltale.
Well, and then they were buried on her husband's property. That doesn't help either.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I
that's
agree
weird too.
I mean, I think juries get it right.
Juries, they usually get it right.
I agree, and sometimes, maybe all the questions aren't answered, but I think the juries still get it right.
The truth, or a pretty darn close version of it, comes out, in my opinion.
I think so too.
And I truly believe that juries do take their jobs very seriously, because for most people, that is the most important job they will ever do. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I get, having kids, getting married, buying a house, important decisions, but decisions that affect third parties. If you're not used to that, that can be very, very stressful. I mean, I've seen jurors need counseling because of what they see at a trial. And I'm sure they offered that to the jurors in this particular case, seeing those graphic photos. And I thought Judge Boyce also, during the trial, they were getting ready to show the photos of the remains that were found of JJ and Ty Lee. And she didn't want to be there for that. And judge is like, oh no, have a seat. Like if you're going to make me and the court, the judge and everybody else sit through that, you can have a seat too, you know? I don't know. There were lots of signs that, you know, try to be objective and make sure she gets her due process and all that. But at the end of the day, the reality of it is there was so much consciousness of guilt. I think the biggest part was, my kids, where are your kids? And just tell us where the kids are and it'll all be okay.
You know, we hear all the time from experts that we hear it oftentimes, or what we talk about is prosecution experts, like in a domestic violence case or a sexual assault case. And no matter how a victim reacted, they will talk about how, well, that's a normal reaction.
Mm-hmm.
I think looking at this case, I can't imagine any parent that followed this case thought I would have reacted the way that mom did. I would have gone off to Hawaii and I would have, you know, lived my best life. And
yeah.
I mean, I think that's pretty damning.
I think it is too. And I don't think you worked on the case. Did you work on the case with me where the mom goes off to work, boyfriend kills kid, they put her in a duffel bag,
Yeah,
carry her across town?
Yep.
Was that our case together? I think
Yep.
so. And like, what do you do for that other than just try and grovel and get the best deal you can? Because that's not normal. People just don't do that.
Well, I think mitigation, you know, I think that's one of those types of cases where we try to come up with mitigation. I think I better hold on.
Yeah. Like I said, the one day, usually I'm out here by myself.
It's like a freeway going by here today. You know, there are some cases where the only thing we can do is try to offer up mitigation. Yep. For, you know, show a tiny little bit of mercy to the client because of things in their past that were no fault of their own, maybe.
Yep.
And literally, I mean, that was one of those cases. There's really nothing you can do.
Yeah, and just so people that are watching to understand, I mean, there's a difference between a defense, which is I didn't do it, or I was legally justified under the law, so therefore I'm not guilty, and what they call an affirmative defense. Then you have mitigation, and mitigation can be anything. Like, hey, you know, the kid's parents got divorced and something's just not been right that way. Or, you know what, we've got reports going back to the kindergarten where they said this kid just wasn't wired right. Parents didn't have the resources for the medications you need. Any of that can be mitigation that you can present to the district attorney to say, wow, maybe a little mercy is warranted here. Maybe not a lot given the case, but sometimes, like I said, it's not an excuse or justification under the law, but it's something to explain how we got there to where we are. And I think sometimes people, you always hear about, oh, I don't care if you had a tough childhood. I had a tough childhood and I turned out okay. Not everybody's wired the same way to handle those stressors in life.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, there are some people who, despite their circumstances, did really well. Mm-hmm. Maybe they had help along the way. Maybe they just had, you know, strong enough character, whatever. There's other people that had tough times in life growing up from a young age, and they didn't come out as well. They weren't as lucky for whatever reason.
Yeah. I always get the one though, where like, you know, the guy's like, well, I quit my job to take care of my mom and my mom passed away and I just, you know, I lost it. And you have to ask him, like, do you think your mom would want you to completely, you know, ruin your life and spiral? I don't think she would do that. She'd probably kick you in the butt and say, you know, get back to work, so to speak.
Right. And from my perspective, I'm not, you know, I'm not on board the everyone's a victim train. I'm not, I never have been. I'm a former cop. You know, what you and I have had a lot of conversations.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying some people have an excuse for doing what they did, but I do think some people's background is worth the judge at least listening to, or the DA perhaps listening to, you know, if we're trying to seek a plea bargain. Because sometimes there are some things in there that, you know, maybe it does make a little bit of a difference, and maybe they do, I don't want to say deserve a little bit of mercy, but maybe it's the first time in their life that they're going to get a little bit of mercy. And, you know, it may not make a difference, or it may be a difference between a a 40-year sentence and a 60-year sentence.
Yeah.
But
Which was a long time.
yeah, well, yeah, if you're going into prison when you're 20 years old, that's a big difference.
I got a letter from a former client. I was co-counsel. Did you ever work with Nancy Holton?
No.
Anyway, we were co-counsel on a homicide case. It was a horrific case. Unless the defendant had a detainer out of a different country, and they keep denying parole because of it. So I get a letter again. Hey, can you confirm there's a detainer on me still? He's like, I'm ready to go home. It's been 22 years. It's like, I think you got a 40-year sentence. Like, it's not quite just time to go.
Right.
40 years was good because it could have been life without parole. But, think about it. 22 years. If you think about all of the things that you've done over the last 22 years,
yeah,
and then think your life is going to be confined to maybe a few prisons.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe very similar. Maybe they move you around the state that you're in, but really that's it. Cement cell, 6x6 cell. Maybe you get a bigger one. Maybe you don't have a cellmate in it. Think about spending your life that way. That's a long, long time.
It is. And if you think about the things that you look forward to, most of them aren't 40 or 60 years out. Most of them are next week or next month or next year. I can't imagine that thought of, if it's life without parole, obviously, at least in my mind, I don't know what you would have to look forward to. Probably nothing. Yeah. But if if you're serving 40 years and you got to do, 75% of it for violent crime or whatever, well, gee, I got to sit there for 30 years. That's pretty dismal. That's a stretch.
Yeah. And I've had clients that they're never getting out. I had a client once that beat 2 death penalty cases, went on a multi-state crime spree, killed a police officer in Colorado Springs and one in Kentucky. Death penalty, both cases, jury spared his life. He's never getting out. And he would tell you the only thing that he would ever ask for is just a little freedom before he dies. He'd like to go sit at a restaurant, have a beer, have a steak. I mean, that's what he misses. He goes, anything else? He goes, I just would like a little freedom before I die.
I get that. And still, even with what we do and everything I've said, it's still, in a lot of those cases, it's hard to feel sorry for him.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, he did a heinous thing. And there's some people that, I don't care how old you get, some people just can't function in society.
Yep.
And I've said this, and sometimes, people on the defense side are like, I can't believe you said that, Scott. But sometimes people just aren't wired right. There's something that they can't follow instructions. That whole antisocial thing and don't get me wrong, I'm one of those guys that, like, if somebody tells me I have to do something, oh, really? Which is weird because I spent 12 years in the Marine Corps. But, it's like, really, why? Is there a better way? I mean, kind of question that.
Well, and there are, we've probably had some cases together. I can't think of one right offhand necessarily, but there's some cases where I've had where that person's story, what they did, you've talked to them, you've sat across the table with them, and in the back of the mind, we're still going to do our job to the fullest. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, when the jury finds them guilty and they get that, life sentence without parole, you're thinking that is exactly where they need to be. Like, some people are just, in my mind, they just come across as pure evil. And I don't know what causes that. I don't know if that's an upbringing. I have no idea what it is. That's somebody with a lot more schooling than me. But there have been a few people where I have thought, okay, I did everything I could on the case, but holy cow, that person is exactly where they need to be.
Oh yeah, I've had a couple of those clients.
Yep.
Where, like, as a member of the community, I would be outraged if this person was ever released. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yep.
Got a super chat here from Catherine. Let's see what it says. Do you think she is so convinced of her religious beliefs that she was trying to preach to all of us and win us over to her bizarre philosophy? Probably just a little bit. I mean, Lori Vallow's speech was just not her speech. Her statement allocution was completely bizarre, completely inappropriate, and literally it makes you think, why did you not do it? Now, so I was a little surprised by this as well, but where was it? Let me look this up here. So Lori Vallow gets, they don't have a not guilty by reason of insanity defense in Idaho, which means you go to trial and then it's sentenced and they determine if basically you go to prison or you go to a mental health hospital, basically for the same amount of time like you'd go to prison. All right, hold on one more time. Jeez. You think that we were at a airport with a hangar door open or something. Literally, normally this time of night, but that's the business jets. People always ask, "What's the busiest time in the airport?" Well, the flight school's out here in the morning, early hours for the clear sky, smooth air, and then the afternoons, all the business jets come back because people are on their business trips. So I thought this was interesting, was that the defense basically said in a lot of their briefings throughout the case was that they intended to bring more evidence as it related to sentencing, or as to her mental health issues at sentencing. They said, "Oh, we're going to call experts. We're going to do all this," and that was, kind of the question of it. And I'm going down here to the end here, and Judge Boyce issued. Oh, it's not there. Okay. That's weird. I can't pull it up now, but basically the judge issued an order and he said that, hey, yeah, she's going to prison and the defense never raised mental health at sentencing. So I had nothing to consider. And I was the one, everyone's like, oh, she's going to prison. I was like, well, they said they were going to bring all this mental health stuff in. Where is it? What's happening? And it didn't materialize. And so maybe that was per her request is the only thing I can kind of suggest. Like, no, do not do that. I'm ordering you not to do that as my attorney. I don't know. I don't I get that at all.
Or is it possible that as they investigated it more, for whatever reason, they decided not to use it?
Let me see. I can't bring that super chat up, Frank. Okay, can you put the one up from Deja Vu? It looks like. Okay, yeah, we did, Catherine. Would you have objected during the victim's statement as much as her attorney did? What objecting to victims who can give a statement? Usually, a good judge will tell people, listen, you need to make your statements to the court. The court is the one conducting the sentencing. Don't make your statements personal as it relates to the defendant. That is objectionable. I just did. You were in this one too, our double humming.
What county?
Without mentioning names, Denver. Lots of stabbing.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
We had a sentencing here. See, we lose track of the cases.
I know. Once it's gone, it's gone on to the next one.
I got more dead bodies floating around the office right now because I got so many homicides right now. It's crazy. But in that particular sentencing, we didn't have anything to say. I mean, he had my client had a brief statement. I read it when it was our time. But the multiple victims' families got up. Hell, they had friends of the victims, like, the daughter of the deceased, and, explained. Really, like, this is their moment. They've waited 2 years for this, and I'm going to get up and say, no, you don't have a right to speak. No. Unless they got up and said my guy was absolute pure Satan, I would not have objected. I told my guy, listen, today is not about you. It's about the victims. You need to respect that. You had your opportunity. It's over. It's a stipulated sentence. We're going through this. If they refer to you and say bad things, it is what it is, right? I mean, And we moved through the sentencing, and for the most part, it was very, I thought it was very respectable by all parties. So, at sentencing, you don't necessarily object. What's it going to make? She was going to, like this case, she's going to get 3 life sentences. What now? Now all of a sudden the defense wants to object. There was so much stuff that was objectionable throughout that trial, but now they're going to object to it. I could not believe that. So, all right. Was there another super chat, Frank? Was that it? All right. So hopefully that answers your question, Deja. Chad's lawyer now says what they're facing for his trial. If you were his lawyer, would you be inclined to cut a deal knowing all the facts? Well, it's interesting because, yes, it's a death penalty case. And the goal of any death penalty case is to get death off the table. I've only had one. We were able to get death off the table. We were like, we're playing with house money at this point. It's bad facts, bad case, etc. So you go do your lawyer stuff, but at the end of the day, you're like, okay, that didn't surprise me. You got your victory by taking death off the table.
Well, and now in Colorado, that's not an option anyway. And so, we've worked on murder cases recently where the prosecution said that the only offer is plead guilty straight up because they're not willing. The bargaining chip that they had was taken away by the legislature. And so, and
this is what I'll never,
or was that a vote? I don't remember whether that was
the legislature did it. The legislature did it, which, California has the death penalty, right? Because years ago, the legislature took it off the ballot, and then they passed via referendum and said, no,
we want
the death penalty exists. And I still think that most citizens of our state would go for that. I think most citizens would. If it had like a national vote or state vote, they'd probably say keep it. But a lot of states got rid of it. And if you read the Constitution, it says that the government can take your life, liberty, and property as long as they give you due process of law. And you get hyper due process in a death penalty case. But the thing that people don't get, and they should have put it to a vote, and I'm not saying, they should go around killing everybody for every offense, but save it for the worst of the worst. But heck, we had the Aurora Theater shooting case. He killed 18 people or 12 people, I think it was. And they couldn't get that in the most conservative jurisdiction in Colorado. One of the most, at least on the front range.
Yeah, certainly in the
at least on the front range.
Yeah. Right. And so I think it handcuffs the prosecution a little bit. And I think it handcuffs the defense a little bit, because like that was the one sort of bargaining chip that I guess both sides had. If death was an option, if it was on the table, prosecution could say, here's your deal. You plead guilty straight up, we'll take the death penalty off the table. Yep. And, as opposed to they're not going to offer anything because they feel like, well, if we offer you second degree murder, we're going to have outraged media, we're going to have outraged families, and sometimes rightfully so. And so it forces everybody's hand, and, there's going to be a trial, and, costing the taxpayers a lot of money, and there's probably no reason for it.
Like in our state, it wasn't used that often, but I've said it was a great bargaining tool for the prosecution and frankly for the defense as well.
Yep.
Because, the client can look at it and say, oh, this is really bad. And wow, if I lose, I could really get death. And they're like, I don't want to, roll those dice. Mm-hmm. So I'll take the life without parole. And if you look at the history of death penalty litigation, the life without parole was suggested by defense attorneys to save their clients from the death penalty.
Right.
But most people don't do that. But here, I mentioned this a while back with our death penalty, because legislators, most of them are idiots, if not all of them. And
regardless of political affiliation,
any political affiliation whatsoever, they're idiots. And nobody thought about the consequences. Like, actually, I don't know, for example, here in Colorado, reading the Constitution, which said a non-bailable offense, so no bail, is a capital case. It's in the Constitution back in 1876 was it? Today's August 1st is Colorado's like 1876 we became a state.
Oh.
Today's Colorado Day.
That's right.
It's in the Constitution that only capital offenses. So when they took away the death penalty, defense counsel, including yours right here, said, hey, my client needs a bail. He needs entitled to a bond. This isn't a capital offense. If you look at the definition in the Colorado Constitution, but nobody, think about that. Nobody in the legislature either bothered to look at it or didn't care, but they were doing what they thought felt right instead of what was, they never look at the unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's face it, if you're charged with murder, most judges aren't going to set a bond. I mean, I got one the other day set, and it was $5 million cash only. My client doesn't have two nickels to rub together.
Right.
You're not going to make bond on that. So,
right. But again, it feels like, somebody probably should have sat down with a legal pad and put pros and cons. You know what I mean?
No,
and listed all the consequences, and they may have still voted the way they did, and that's fine. But
sure.
But at least they would have done that, having taken all of that into consideration. Yep. And so you've heard judges. There's been a lot of cases in the media recently where judges have made statements about. I think you and I discussed this last week or so. There was one out on the Western Slope. It was like $75 million
mm-hmm.
because and then of course the defense attorney argues that. That's unreasonable. Yeah,
Judge, the bond needs to be no greater than reasonably necessary to assure my client's presence in court and to safeguard the rules, safeguard the community safety. And what that really means is the judge, no greater than reasonably necessary. And you can also impose conditions that can assure that less than $75 million. Because I don't know about you, but I don't have $75 million hanging out.
No, and nobody I know has that. And
no,
they're not going to scrape it together in a GoFundMe either. So.
Yeah, well,
no, I mean, most of our clients
in
murder cases, most of our clients, a $500,000 cash bond, they're never getting out.
Yeah, I got a lady the other day, $50,000 cash only.
She ain't getting out.
Parents thought, oh, I'll just go get a bonds person.
Yeah.
Nope. Sorry, no, you didn't hear that correctly. That's cash only.
Right.
Now, back in the good old days, as I used to call them, in the 90s, when all the drug cases were so rampant,
mm-hmm.
$50,000 bond to get somebody out of custody, and they were gonna get deported. They would literally show up with a trash bag full of cash at the bonding office. It was a crazy time when
never to be seen again.
Occasionally they would catch them at the airport getting deported. They would have an immigration hold.
Right.
They'd post the bond. They get sent to immigration, and then every now and then the ICE officers would catch them literally on the airplane getting. Like, no, you're coming back with us.
I had a case a long time ago where client's parents, cash sure to your property, put up a house, and he skipped. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, man, that's some kind of, I don't know if evil's the right word, but that's some kind of non-caring kind of stuff there. Your parents put up their house, and you skip out.
That's because some people are wired that way.
Yep.
It's only about them. And they don't care. The consequences be damned.
Yep.
And these, and it's all fun and games until, they come for your house.
Yeah, I don't know what ended up happening, but I know there was litigation over it, and I wouldn't be surprised if ultimately they probably did lose their house. They signed on the line.
We had litigation of a very similar situation. We represented a bondsman, same type of deal, where somebody skipped town. He didn't have enough collateral on the house, but he wanted to foreclose on the house to get his money because the bonds people don't do that out of the goodness of their heart.
Right.
And they got it. The insurance company's like, where's our money? We're being ordered to pay. Insurance company has the money to go pay. Usually the bondsman doesn't. So then they used to get put on what they call the boards, where they couldn't write bonds anymore if they had outstanding unpaid bonds where they've been forfeited. And so it was like game on, like,
wow.
Let's go get them. And, it got ugly and nasty. Like, no, you don't understand. I'm coming to take your house and we're going to sell it.
Yeah.
If my client doesn't find your son, you better, because we're going to take your house. And it's funny. They always kind of show up. Now, PR bonds, totally different.
Right.
And this is what I think would be the great scandal someday if anybody ever looks at it, but no one ever does, because our investigative reporters in the state of Colorado are more interested in getting invited to all the good cocktail parties than they are to actually doing investigative reporting. But now they were so big on PR bonds, and most states are like that. Oh, you sold drugs to kids, $10,000 personal recognizance bonds, sign right here. Now, if you don't show up,
we want your $10,000.
We're going to pay $10,000.
Right. Well, big deal.
Somebody could go, if I had time, I just don't have time to go do it. Go find out how many of those personal recognizance bonds that have been forfeited have ever collected a penny. And I would bet a big steak dinner on it that the number is 0. They don't collect on it. What's the state's going to say? Oh, let me go get your money. Yeah. No, they're not going to.
I mean, they would need to fund a whole new office to do that. You'd need. I can't even imagine how many PR bonds there are, and we both know how many people have
skipped town as soon as they
10,
got
15, 20 FTAs on their criminal history.
Yeah.
And a lot of those are PR bonds.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you need an office and probably 15 people to.
It was so bad, particularly during COVID, it cracked me up. A guy would have a PR bond. He would fail to appear. The judge would make him stay in custody. And he would set the bond at a personal recognizance bond, like doubling it. Like, instead of a 5,000, now it's 10,000. That'll show him he's really going to show up.
Boy, he is.
And, and you're just sitting there as a defense attorney. I'm like, I don't want to tell you, Judge. I have no idea where he is. What are you going to do? Really make it serious? Make it a 30,000 personal recognizance bond? Ooh, right?
Well, and a lot of those clients, they don't have any money to begin with. So, even if you force them to, what are they going to do? They don't have the money. So then you're going to jail them for. I mean,
you can't keep them forever.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so.
I mean, although as well as I do, if somebody stays in custody, it oftentimes brings them to a resolution, particularly if the offer means getting out of custody,
which was part of the argument for getting
bonds.
Rid of cash bonds and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, I get the argument for it, but again, I think that's another one of those situations where they didn't think through all of the consequences.
Yeah,
it sounded really nice.
Yeah.
It felt good at the time.
Yeah, and you get these bond reports. Oh, they have a CPAP score of 3 or whatever, and we think they have a 50% chance of showing up for court. And the judge is like, I'm going to take a chance on you that you show up. So I'm going to give you a PR bond. And they don't.
Yeah.
I mean,
because he didn't learn his lesson after the previous 7 failure to appears.
And then, of course, they get out and commit new crime. And that's, and
right.
I said it before, I'll say it again. It's not anything new, but past performance is indicative of future results. It's
in every business.
It is. I mean, I get it. People can change, but most people don't. And I hate to say that because I know lots of people that have, that have been in trouble and turned out to be very productive members of society and make a one-time mistake. And it was an aberration. But, when you have a guy, we had a client, one of our attorneys that's no longer with us, the guy failed to appear. We're talking years. Hey, can you cover, are you still, I guess so. Yeah, I'll show up. The guy's got failures to appear as long as, my arm, 9 prior felony convictions, cases pending in multiple jurisdictions. And, even I couldn't with a straight face say personal recognizance bond. He failed to appear on a personal recognizance bond. I asked for $5,000 cash property to surety, and the judge made it 10. So, I mean, it's just a, it's a crazy, crazy world. Frank, were you able to get Kay? All right. Well, Kay, if you'd like to join us, please check your email. Frank sent you a link. If you'd like to join us, I would love to get your perspective on obviously everything being complete now in at least for Lori Vallow's case. I just, I'm happy for them. I've met Larry and Kay in person. They've been on the show several times. They've called in. They were Patreon members. I think they're still Patreon members. So maybe they'll call them a Patreon or something along those lines. But just the nicest people in the world. Larry is a successful businessman. I mean, and like I said, I truly believe this case, as it relates to the deaths for JJ, Tylee, Tammy, Daybell, and even Charles Vallow, probably would not have gone anywhere but for Kay and Larry. They're the ones that kept pushing, saying, "Where's our grandson? Where's our grandson? Go do a check. Where is it?" And the threat of imminent incarceration breaks the bonds of loyalty. And people are like, "Oh, the child's not with me," like she said. I mean, it was such. I think it's the epitome of murder after deliberation.
Well, and that's why I guess you and I were talking a little bit off air about the religious aspect of it. And I guess that's part of the struggle for me in believing that she truly felt, I'm not saying she didn't believe in God or whatever. I don't mean that, but some of her reasons religiously that she gave, it kind of seemed like those came in after the fact. If you really did it for those reasons or felt that way or whatever, then why wasn't that at the very beginning? Why did you need people to help you try to cover up where these bodies were or whatever? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If you had a completely clean conscience about it.
That's kind of like when a child dies and they say, "Oh, if the parents had got them medical treatment, they'd be alive. They had a simple infection or something. They could have treated it." They're like, "No, we don't believe in that, or it's a religious beliefs." I can kind of respect that, right? Like this is, but to make it up that the world was coming to an end and it's just it didn't fly for me. And like I said, we've done, dare I say, the religious cult cases.
Yes, we have.
And they always kind of pick and choose, and there's the leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when
we've had the leader,
I
mean, it's always a weird dynamic because the first thing you say is, no one's going to believe this crap. Even if you're a very religious person and that's always where you've been, they're going to say, "Yeah, this isn't right." I think religious people are very respectful of other people's religious beliefs, but it's never been a justification just to go around and start killing people. I think we're done with the crusades kind of thing, trying to convert people.
Yeah, and even outside of extremism, I'm not aware of any modern day religions that call for you to kill people. So I'm not saying there wasn't a religious component to it. There very well could have been, but it just seems like maybe that was used far later after the fact to try to justify some things.
Well, and just the fact that, I mean, she's got mental health issues. I mean, she was not competent for a long time. And the legal definition of competent, as you know, is not the same as insane.
Right.
I mean, not competent is you don't appreciate what you allegedly did wrong, the right and wrong of it at the time. That's an NGRI type of thing. But competent means you don't understand the proceedings taking place around you, or you're unable to assist your attorney in the preparation of the defense. And I've had to do those, Did you work on a guy on the Western Slope that it was the grand conspiracy? These Posse Comitatus guys?
Yes.
The Posse Comitatus guys are...
went to visit one of them in Buena Vista also.
Did you really? Yeah, okay, yeah. The Posse Comitatus guys are the biggest... I'll never get another Posse Comitatus case ever again, because if I say this, but that I can live without that. They are some of the craziest wackadoos around. They don't think that, they're... what's the word I'm looking for? They think the UCC code is, they registered their name as under the Uniform Commercial Code. And, they get into the weeds, and then they start putting liens on judges and prosecutors' properties and just the weirdest stuff. And I don't need a license from the state to give it to me. And like, okay. And I saw a guy once, wasn't my client, but he was in jail and he was a Posse Comitatus guy and did something. And the judge was like, "Yeah, I'm revoking your bond." And I think I was there on the same courtroom, like the same docket day next week when he was there. And he came around rather quickly and wind up pleading guilty because all of a sudden it got real. And a lot of these people don't realize how real it gets until they get thrown in custody. And it was like, oh, I lost my house in foreclosure, man. I was just seemed like a good idea. I was really pissed at everybody, but I didn't know we were doing this.
Well, and it's funny because with a lot of the conspiracy theory clients, it seems so obvious to us, and I'm not always sure if they really believe that, or if that's sort of they think the only defense that they have. I'm working on a case right now, and now because they don't like the witness interviews that I did, I'm part of the conspiracy, of course.
Obviously,
yeah.
You're obviously you've been converted to the conspiracy,
right? Yeah.
Versus just no, I'm just listening and writing down.
Right.
I'm a scribe. I take down what they have to say.
Right, and some of their own family members will talk about, it's ridiculous, they're conspiracy theorists, and they hear that from, they'll go through several attorneys. This same case, they're on at least their third attorney, if not their fourth attorney, and it's the same. Every one of them is telling them the same thing, and so I'm not sure whether they really believe that in their mind, or whether that's just sort of their excuse, their rationalization about, well, I can't admit that I did anything wrong. So
I had a guy in the military, and I did it with John Baker, who was retired as a general. He was the chief defense counsel of the Marine Corps. Prior enlisted, I think he was an artillery guy. And we were the detailed military counsel, because when you're in the military, you get your appointed military counsel. That was me. Then you can get a detailed military counsel. And I had met John Baker, another matter. I'm like, hey, man, this could be fun. He was up in North Carolina, Cherry Point. I was in South Carolina. I was like, hey, come on down. It'll be fun. The trial took like 4 weeks. Jury convicted in 28 minutes.
Wow.
And he had 2 civilian counsel as well. Mike McCloskey, who was a great guy. He actually appeared in one of those movies about Alec Murdoch. He still practices down in the Low Country. And a guy by the name of Jim Wegman, who also still practices down there, but he does like real estate stuff now. But it was great. 4 attorneys. And I remember sitting around and we're like, who at the CIA did this guy piss off that, all these witnesses who had never met all had the same story of what took place.
Mm-hmm.
And, only thing the client would ever say was never happened. Never happened.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the jury promptly came back and said, oh, it happened. Oh, it happened lots and lots of times. And it got so bad, the Marine Corps, I think, just cut it off, because they kept going back to this guy's every duty station and finding similar stuff and people coming forward. And, they were like, we're not going to look anymore, because it was just that bad. And
but everybody was in on it.
This guy had, a wife, 2 kids. One of them had a learning disability. I think he was autistic or had Down syndrome or something. And he would rather go to prison for the rest of his life than admit that he had certain proclivities for getting young Marines drunk and doing terrible things to them.
But don't you think there are certain allegations, certain crimes charged that it seems like are more likely for the client to suggest it's some kind of conspiracy, sort of along the lines with what you were just saying, the certain proclivities. And I think there's some people that just,
they can't admit it.
They cannot admit what
they did
to anybody.
And oftentimes those are the kind of people that need to go to prison for the rest of their life.
Yeah, because if they can't admit it, they're probably not going to get treatment.
It's like the old, the first step is admitting you have a problem kind of deal. This 12-step program or something.
Yep.
The first step is admit you have a problem. Then you got to go make amends. And I don't know all of them. I've never been to a meeting, but that's the first thing. Acceptance of responsibility is one of the greatest factors that courts consider, when considering sentencing. Mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
A guilty plea is mitigating, because you've accepted responsibility.
Right.
You have made the government not have to prove their case, use resources, make the victims get up and testify. I had a guy once. God, these cases are so terrible. I look back and like, God, how did I remember I got a call. It was in the middle of the night, and I answered my phone and, what's going on? The police are at the door. They're going to arrest me. Well, what's the allegation? Well, he had engaged in some illegal conduct with his daughter. And the prosecutors made a reasonable offer because they didn't want to have to put the daughter on the stand. She was young. It was her dad. Just bad facts. And the guy kept saying, she'll never testify against me. I'm like, I always operate under the assumption that every witness is going to show up. I prepare like every witness is going to show up. Even if you tell me they're long departed, unless I got a birth certificate, you must assume they're going to be there. And sure enough, I'm like, no, she's going to testify against you. And, we're there at trial and he's there, his parents in the background, she's not going to say these bad things happen. She's going to change her mind when she sees him. And I find that mostly in sex offenders. They think that they have this bond, this aura about them that, well, if they get on the witness stand and they see me, they're going to realize how serious this is, and they're just going to change their story and admit that they lied about the whole thing. No.
Well, the other group is the sort of the gangbanger types.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like every gang type of case that I have, the client thinks, don't worry, nobody's going to say anything. Nobody's going to testify, especially when there's multiple co-defendants.
Yeah.
They are pushing each other off to see who can get to the DA first.
Yep.
To offer up testimony to get the best deal. It's what's the old saying? No honor among thieves. That is the epitome of that. And it's funny because some of them will go to trial. Don't worry, they won't testify against me. Doesn't matter if I went out and talked to them. They said, oh no, here's what I'm going to say. Here's what happened. I'm going to testify. Oh no, they won't testify against me. And sure enough, we've gone to trial on those cases, and there the person is, and they're testifying against you.
Because it goes back to, hold on, another large jet coming by here. Taking their time. Anyway. Okay. Let me finish this thought. But yeah, that's goes back to the threat of imminent incarceration.
Yes, it is.
You got a 30-count indictment and somebody's looking saying, man, I'm looking to spend the rest of my life in prison for what this knucklehead did. Yeah, he's a good guy. And we were brothers and we're always going to be brothers. And, we're family.
But he pulled the trigger, not me.
But yeah, I'm really not into going to prison for him.
Right.
And, sure enough, there he is. And when you have a co-conspirator case, and what Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell didn't realize, first one to the DA's office wins.
Yes, always.
If Chad Daybell had gone in, I think the prosecutors in the Lori Vallow case thought they charged it as a conspiracy, but I really think that based upon arguments of Mr. Wood early on in the case was that Chad Daybell is just as evil, if not more, than Lori Vallow, because he somehow tainted her with these beliefs that, she was this princess and they had a previous life together and you're going to be the princess and we're going to gather our 144,000 people and we're going to be the only ones to survive the great apocalypse. Little do they know, I wasn't part of their cult and I would survive it because,
Right. Well,
the rally point is the hangar, ladies and gentlemen.
It's interesting because this job has taught me a lot about human nature. Between this and my previous profession, of course, it's amazing what you learn about people.
It's funny. Funny you should say that because I mentioned that today on our regular show. Is that this is a front seat to seeing people at their worst, mm-hmm. and you truly get to see human nature. And I always, I may sound like when I first met the lovely Miss Kristen, she lived in a very nice little bubble, right? And of course, we're driving around like, oh, I did a homicide there. Oh yeah, I did an aggravated robbery there. The guy shot somebody. She's like, oh my God, like what the hell? And I'm like, oh yeah, they did it. They totally did it. And I think there was something, something about a volleyball coach or something that, one of her, he was under investigation. I'm like, of course he did it. Like, what? We couldn't find a single volleyball coach that's a female to coach the girls. No, it had to be the guy, right? And you become very cynical.
Oh yeah.
And it's not that you don't. I mean, I like to think my glass is half full, but it just opens up the door that, excuse me, there are bad people in the world.
My glass is half full of reality.
Exactly. That's a good way of saying
Yeah.
it. Half full of reality, because there's evil exists in the world, and you hope there isn't, but there is.
Well, there is, and there's also a whole lot of stupidity and drugs and alcohol, and I mean, I think most people, in my opinion, most people that commit crimes aren't evil. They're drunk, they're high, they're stupid, a combination of all of them,
all three.
And then, as society, in a lot of ways, we just keep making it easier and easier and easier for them to do it. And, I mean, that's why people walk around neighborhoods at 4:00 in the morning, checking door handles, because there's dumb enough people that'll leave it open. They don't have to smash out a window or worry about a car alarm going off, because they can just open the door, because there's people who leave their car doors open, their garage doors open, their house doors open, whatever. So,
yeah. And I mean, we've talked about this. I mean, I'm a very, libertarian type of guy. You do what you want, your own property, your own house, but as soon as you harm somebody else, man, there's got to be consequences for it, because otherwise you're just going to get more of what you tolerate. And you want to do drugs, fine, go do all the drugs you want, man, but I don't want to pay for your transportation to the hospital. I don't want to pay for the doctor to get your stomach pumped. I don't want to pay for you breaking into somebody's house to support your habit. So I think that's a bit of a fallacy when they say drugs are a victimless crime.
I was just going to say that.
They're not.
They never are. Because most of the people that are imprisoned or in jail for doing drugs, it's probably not just the drugs that landed them in prison. I mean, think about all the cases we've had where people have been charged multiple times for auto theft, for breaking into cars, for garage burglaries. It's all to fund their drug habit. And, so they have a connection that they sell the stuff to, so that they get some money, so they can buy some more drugs. I mean, it's just this constant revolving door.
And it's usually the same people.
Yeah, frequently. I mean, that's why you have people that have, we've had those clients, they have 72 entries on their criminal history, and, multiple auto thefts and burglaries and just on and on and on and on and on. And, they never do more than 3 or 4 years in prison. And
I used to have going back to the military, I used to have a sergeant major that would, he's always like, "Sir, you don't get it. You're going to spend 90% of your time on 10% of the knuckleheads in your platoon," or whatever. And he was right.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not because he was cynical. It's just human nature.
Yes, it is.
I don't know how to say it, but it's like past performance is indicative. If you look back, the guy was a knucklehead from the beginning.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. And, previously, as I was a police officer,
mm-hmm.
and, it was a metro area community, but not a real big community. And so you used to call them frequent flyers.
You knew where to go.
You knew where to, depending on what happened, you knew where to go look.
You knew who the local, who are the usual suspects.
Exactly. And they were, and there was a reason, it's,
and you weren't wrong.
To this day, I can recite certain people's dates of birth, their addresses. I mean, it's crazy. And I still live in the same town, as you know.
Yeah.
So, speaking about driving family members around and pointing out various houses, my kids used to love doing that with an ice cream cone.
Yeah. Don't go to that house.
Exactly.
Stay away from that one.
Exactly.
Across the street.
Yep.
Yeah, I know. It's and I'd like to think that we put my kids in a bubble growing up, but it was realistic. Because it would be like, "Hey, yeah, we're gonna go to a movie, pile of family in the car, but first I got to swing by the jail and have him sign paperwork." And my my daughter was always like, "Are we going to jail or are we going to prison, Dad?" Well, this was county jail, and after a while she knew the difference.
Mm-hmm.
My kids were like the only ones that knew the difference. Like,
right.
Right. Or sometimes the cynical people, like, "Are we going to go see the peanut lady, Dad?" I'm like, "Did you hear that conversation?" Like, "Well, why did you call her the peanut lady?" Well, maybe because they cracked the child's skull like a peanut, you know.
Oh,
I mean, it was,
jeez.
and that's, you know, if you can't have a sense of humor about it, even though
Right.
it's some, I mean, you'd probably cry if you couldn't joke about it from the stuff that, you
Yeah,
know, police officers seeing people in the criminal justice, whether
absolutely.
prosecutor and defense.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever gone to an autopsy, you know, we see a lot of photos of autopsies, obviously, you know, all the murder cases, but you know, if you've ever gone to an autopsy, and the more you go to, the more and more scientific it is, and the less and less gruesome, I guess,
Yeah.
it is. And it's just,
you get numb to it.
you do, and you have to. And it's the same if you're a police officer, you kind of get numb to it, and you lose that ability to feel for people or whatever, you know, and you realize that not all, but most people put themselves in that situation one way or another, and you kind of lose the ability to feel sorry for them.
Yeah, and I need to update my will, but I'm going to put in my will, no autopsy.
I don't know if that's up to you.
I don't care. I don't care what it is. Guess. Guess however I died. You know, you'll figure it out.
There
If
you
it was, you know, stab, gunshot, car out, you know, blunt force trauma, you know it. It's homicide, accident, whatever.
Well,
no autopsy.
So talk about bringing it back around full circle. Isn't it interesting how in this case, was it the fourth husband who they exhumed and changed the cause of death? Was that the...
That was the wife. That was Tammy Daybell.
Okay.
They exhumed her body because there was no autopsy done. They're like, oh, I got to get her in the ground. Got to get her in the ground.
So it's funny because they said, oh, it's natural causes, so let's just bury her. I'd love to know, how did they arrive at natural causes?
Yeah. A healthy woman who I think was training to run a marathon or something. One day she just died.
Seems natural to me.
Usually the statutes say autopsy is warranted.
Yeah, if they're not basically under the immediate care of a physician, some sort of a
terminal illness.
Yeah, terminal illness. You're right. Usually it's, well, we're going to do an autopsy. And although you do find in a lot of smaller communities, rural communities, not so much.
Yeah. Hold on a second. Plane going by. Well, I mean, and I know you know this, but some of our viewers may not, is that in a lot of the smaller communities, the coroner is elected. You don't have to be a doctor or a pathologist to be a medical examiner. You're elected.
Well,
and then they
to be a coroner, to be a medical examiner, you still have to be
a doctor.
But yeah, the elected coroner can be John Smith that, you know, retired from, you know, he was a life insurance agent or, you know, whatever. I mean, yeah, and that's the person that signs the death certificate.
Yep.
Which is just crazy.
Yep. And, you know, a lot, but they don't have it. I mean, we've seen it in cases, the smaller towns you get to, rural communities, they don't have that many doctors, and they contract out the medical exams to do that.
Which also makes you wonder, is that why there's fewer of them? You know, because, you know, there's so many of them in the metro area. I mean, their days are booked. I mean, they're just doing one after another, after another, after another. I mean, the Denver office alone has, what, 8
coroners, I think?
8 medical examiners or whatever.
Have you been to the medical examiner's office in Denver, the new one?
The new one? Yeah.
We were there
down in that old industrial neighborhood.
Yeah. It's like a warehouse.
It is.
And they just pack it full of freezers of dead bodies.
Yep.
And when it first opened, we had to do an interview with one of the examiners, I think the chief medical examiner there. And he was so proud of it. He's like, let me give you a tour of it. And, you know, walking around and, you know, all the, you know, it's like the movies where they pull people
compared to their old one. It is
Yeah.
really nice and roomy,
and they have the John Does and the Jane Does, and if they can't figure it out after a certain amount of time, they have a fund to pay for a
funeral,
quick funeral, either cremation or burial. I mean, it's an interesting area.
It's been, well, like, if I spent all that time and money on medical school, I cannot imagine that that's what I would do. Although, I don't know. It's probably better than proctologists.
Some of them are very nice, but I could see they probably don't have a good bedside manner, and it was a good fit for them. But the ones that are really good, like the chief medical examiner in Denver, very good on the stand, and a true scientist. He just calls it the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
We had a case where, it was a fight, and the guy had a knife, and the guy's coming at him with a pole, and he kind of like lunges and pokes the guy and hits him in the arm, and he hits the artery here in the arm. Is it carotid artery or
no? Carotid is.
It's one of the
carotid's
arteries in
down
the
here.
arm. I knew the name at the time, but
No, that's femoral. I don't know. Carotid
one
is
of the
up here,
arteries.
I think, yeah.
One of the arteries in the arm.
Mhm.
And the guy bled out and died, and they charged it as a homicide case. And our guy didn't intend to kill the guy. And the coroner's on the stand. It's a 1 in a million shot. Never seen it. The odds of doing that again are literally 1 in a million. Jury still came back second-degree murder, probably for, maybe the client was mean mugging the clients on the stand, but it actually got reversed on appeal on an instruction issue, which I always say, judge, cases don't come back if you give me the instructions I ask for. And sure enough, he refused to give the instruction. Court of Appeal said, reverse, give him the instruction. And it's up at the Supreme Court right now. They're waiting for cert.
Wow.
So it's, what can we do? All right. Was there another super chat, Frank? Let's go to the super chat here. And we do appreciate the super chats. We don't beg for them. We don't ask for them like some people do. But yeah. Is it possible that she used her statements to set herself up for an insanity plea in Arizona? I don't know, but if I was the attorneys in Arizona for Lori Vallow, the first thing I would do is comp her. I would say, let's have another competency exam. She has a history of mental illness. It took 10 months to restore her. And at one point she went sent back for another month or two. So clearly she's got some issues. But is it not guilty by reason of insanity? Yeah, I think it goes more to the, she wants to talk about her afterlife that she's visited and all that and all these people visit her. But that's just her belief. I think it's more of the can't assist the attorneys in her defense.
Well, and it really doesn't matter what her defense is in Arizona because she got 3 life sentences in Idaho, and that was the first case. So you would have thought that you would have thrown everything you had, at the wall in the first case. Because if you lose that one, the Arizona case doesn't matter.
Yeah, and just going back to the Lori Vallow, let's face it, she's never getting out. She's going to die in prison.
Right.
But I still look back at that case and I wonder what the hell were her attorneys thinking, because the defendant only has a couple of decisions to make. Who is her attorney going to be? Right. And if you can't afford it, you're going to get the public defender or appointed counsel. Whether you accept a guilty plea, and if you go to trial, whether you testify or not.
Mm-hmm.
Strategies, defenses, things of that nature usually up to the attorney themselves. Now, sometimes if the attorneys say, hey, I want to run a insanity defense, or I want to run a self-defense or something, it can become a conflict because the client will be like, that's not what happened and I'm not going to do that. Or they're going to, I'm going to get up and testify and completely blow that out. So you have this inconsistency of defense theory between the defense attorney and the defendant. And they can have here what they call a burger root hearing in front of a different judge other than the one that's before them to say, is there a conflict? And usually the judges will say, you don't get to really make that decision. The attorneys are the ones that get to ask the questions, what witnesses to call. Obviously, defenses gets a little trickier. But in this case, Vallow was like, she won't allow us to run, some sort of defense that we would like to. And so our hands are tied. But you can still go out there and do. I was just, some of the questioning I thought was so lame. And not that I thought Lori Vallow was innocent, but you still want to see good lawyering. And I just don't think we had good lawyering on Lori, and nothing against them. I don't know all the details of what she told them, but you just sit there and wonder, like, man, why are you not at least asking some good questions for God's
sake? They didn't present anything.
It was terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I've done many trial where I presented no defense, no evidence in the case in chief for the
Right.
defense, but there were certainly some better questions they could have asked. I could have asked a string of questions, and I was, I wasn't even there.
Well, and see, that's one of the things that made me kind of wonder whether or not her mental illness defense, if you will, was legitimate, because I've worked a whole lot of cases with mental illness, and you usually have doctors and therapists and school teachers and neighbors and friends, different people who can testify about the progression of the mental illness and what they saw, what they experienced. You know what I mean? And there was none of that. And so I guess that did the mental illness all of a sudden not come up until after she was charged with murder?
And the defense also had stated that they've had evaluation. She was found not competent. We're going to present all this at least at sentencing. If we, if we're not going to, we know we can't do it in the case in chief, but at sentencing, it's a legitimate issue. And Judge Boyce said in an order that he put out today, she's going to DOC. Like, you guys want her to go to a mental facility? You didn't present any evidence of that.
Yeah. And so you would have thought there were, if this was a legitimate mental illness, where were all those people in her past, even if it's the immediate past, who had treated her, who had dealt with her, who had experienced different things with her? Why not put all of them on at the sentencing phase then? And there was none of them.
Yeah. And that's what I just don't understand, because I mean, that case that we had where it was the cult thing, strongly held religious beliefs, the world's coming to an end, we're going to do this stuff that just doesn't seem normal. That's their strongly held conviction that they're entitled to that, but it's not a defense, and it's not NGRI either. So, client goes to prison if you lose. So I don't know.
Did.
Quick Flip gave $10. Thank you, Quick Flip. Oh, is there something else coming? 2 questions. Do you have any famous defense attorneys that you admire, like F. Lee Bailey, Racehorse Haynes, Johnny Cochran? Second, as a pilot, are you instrument trained? Well, second question first. Yes. As defense attorneys, I used to have this book, and I can't find it, but it was titled, I think, called Some of the Greatest. They're like 7 of the greatest. And Racehorse Haynes was one of them. He was a defense attorney down in Texas that always had, great outcomes, go try the case, etc. And there's some of them. I've met F. Lee Bailey. He's now passed away, but in his prime, he was truly a great attorney. Maybe hit the bottle just a little too much. But when I met him, he was clearly sobered up, but he lost his license for it was money laundering.
Oh, geez.
For drug clients down in Miami back in the 80s and things like that, where, that'll be $1 million. Here you go. Here's, it's cash.
Okay.
And, you'd have to explain where that money came from and what have you. So he got in trouble for that. You have any defense attorneys?
No, I've some that I'd like to badmouth, but I don't know that I have. No, not right.
I think locally, one that there's probably 2 that come to mind for me here. One is a guy by the name of Scott Robinson. Brilliant. And his law partner, and I think he worked as an associate for him, was Walter Garash, who just recently passed away. And he won some big cases. The one that comes to mind is murder in the bank vault.
Yep, with the ex-police officer.
Former police officer.
Wasn't that on Valentine's Day or something?
Yeah, Valentine's Day.
Yep.
And Scott Robinson was the one that basically said, how could somebody get through this elaborate bank vault with all the security and everything? And he's a great attorney. I think he does mostly appellate work now, and some PI stuff, but he still does consulting. You see him on the news every now and then, but he's a great attorney. And the thing about those great attorneys is they would always talk to you in court. They were always like, hello, young man, have a seat. How how are you here? What's your client? What's your theory? You know, they always want to talk about cases. And I had the pleasure of being co-counsel a couple times with Walter Garash. And, you know, you just never knew. Nobody knew what he was going to do when he walked into a courtroom. I remember once there was a case, and I have no reason to dispute that he actually had a medical emergency, but it was in federal court. And, I had a client who had flipped, and he needed more time for somebody to show up, and he was like, no, we're not wasting jury's time. You know, coincidentally, and I'm not a big fan of coincidences, but he checked himself into the hospital. Oh, Judge, the old ticker, you know, I'm getting up there, and
wow, that's taking one for the team there.
What have you. But you never knew what you were going to get with him. And I just admire those attorneys that were like, you know, you always say, oh, I've never lost a case. Well, then you're not a defense attorney, because every great defense attorney has lost a case because you can't win them all. There's just no way. Sometimes the facts are just overwhelming. And when they give you what is referred to as a GORT offer, guilty or trial, let's go, you know?
Yeah. And oftentimes the reason they're giving you that offer, which is no offer, is because they know they have a damn solid case. And
exactly.
There's nothing you can do. We've gone to trial recently on some of those.
Yep. It's like, okay.
If you do the best you can, you've got nothing or very little. And what are you going to do?
Yep.
Doesn't matter how good you are.
Exactly. But like all good prosecutors, what do they like? Certainty. We had a case recently, we won it, or we lost it, I mean. And they knew there were issues because we created some appellate issues in court at the trial. And so at the end of the trial, we're getting ready to go to the habitual phase. And they're like, hey, will your client take, you know, number of years, but you have to waive appeal.
Oh.
And, you know, the judge was like, what do you mean? I'm like, Judge, you can waive appeal. Federal court, they require that all the time. And yeah, when you plead guilty in federal court, you waive any appeals. It's kind of standard practice in federal court. And, but they like certainty. So when you waive appeal, you know, you miss the deadline, you don't file anything. And, but there's certainty there. Witnesses don't have to come back in 3 to 5 years, because you know how it, even rounding up friendly witnesses is it's hurting cats.
Yeah, it's hard to do.
And a prosecutor would tell you that any good prosecutor would tell you that it is hurting cats.
Well, you know, that's one of the things we tell our clients all the time is time is on your side. Don't be in a hurry, because oftentimes
people disappear.
People disappear and
people die.
Yeah,
of natural causes.
Yeah, or they move away, and you know, most people are pretty easy to find, but not everybody.
Yep.
And it depends on their situation and how they live and so on and so forth. And sometimes people are hard to find. And sometimes their story changes, or sometimes they get arrested. And now they don't want to be involved. They don't want to testify in the other case. So we tell people that all the time. Don't be in a hurry. Take your time.
Take time. Time is on your side, particularly if you've got nothing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yes.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's get to the subject that usually offends somebody, regardless of what you talk about.
Lighter, would you?
How about the Donald Trump indictments that came down this evening, or late this afternoon, I should say? You know, I mean, let's face it, Donald Trump has legal problems. Okay, whether you hate the man or you love the man, he has legal problems. And the problem with his situation is he has so many cases and he has so many counts, something's going to stick.
Oh yeah.
That's just the way it is. Something is going to stick. And, you know, you start thinking, well, do I really want my president to be a convicted felon? You know,
there's nothing that prohibits it.
Nothing prohibits. He could literally get convicted, go to prison, and still be elected president if he's the nominee.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that bodes well for your decision-making process, you know, for sure.
Yeah.
You know,
testify in court.
As we often tell, you know, clients, half the battle is avoiding the circumstances that have brought you here. Like, why did you do that? Why would you think that was a good idea? And, you know, I think most people have seen his speech on January 6th. Like, let's go down there and march and let them know the people, blah, blah, blah. But he did say peacefully.
He did.
But now he's got to realize his jury's not coming from South Florida. It's coming from Washington, D.C.
Yep.
And if you know anything about D.C., everybody hates Donald Trump in D.C., whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, because if you're in D.C., let's face it, you're establishment. And the establishment doesn't like Donald Trump. I don't think that's going in any particular way. It's just reality.
Mm-hmm.
And his defense attorneys are going to have to tell him, regardless if he thinks he did nothing wrong, that's the job of a defense attorney, is tell everybody the good, the bad, and the ugly about their case. And any defense attorney is going to say, this is not a good jurisdiction. And he also drew not a great judge. And I'm not a big, he's a Trump Republican appointee or Obama Democrat appointee. Most federal judges are going to follow the law, and you have to assume they're going to follow the law. And the big issue for Donald Trump is most of the people that have been held on the January 6th stuff, all the charges, have had pretrial confinement. I've had a couple of people come and talk with me, but they don't have any money to afford representation. So they're going to get court-appointed counsel from the D.C. area or the surrounding area. And, people are like, I'm not pleading guilty to anything. I was right in what I did, and I can do that. And I don't know. I think he's got trouble, and I think he's got to be realistic here.
Well, the very first thing you said, I agree wholeheartedly, is that, it's like a 225 count coca indictment here. They don't have to convict you of everything.
Just one.
Something's going to stick. I agree with you. And I think, so he's got state charges in New York, I believe.
Yep. State charges in New York.
Yeah. He's got the charges in Florida. And now he's got the charges in DC.
And then possibly in Georgia as well for kind of the same conduct, but
right.
It's separate jurisdictions, separate sovereigns. One's the state, one's the federal government. So, they can charge him if they choose to do so. And if I was a betting man, I would say, I bet you Georgia charges him as well. And in the heart of Atlanta, you're not going to get a friendly jury either for him.
Well, and as you see more and more of the people around him getting charged, it's kind of like what we talked about earlier. The threat of lengthy incarceration. There's going to be people, there already have been, but there's going to be more people that, whether they're telling the truth or not, are going to be willing to testify against him in exchange for favors or better treatment.
Yep.
And it's no different than a robbery case in Denver, Colorado. It's the same thing. I mean, you put pressure on people, and they're more likely to start coming forward, and et cetera, et cetera. So, obviously, the more that he's charged, the more jurisdictions, the more counts, the more cases, the more likely it is that something's going to stick.
Yep. And he's got some serious problems, and the issue is going to be pre-trial detention, because most of the people charged with January 6th have been detained in custody pending trial. So
that would be something.
Normally in federal court, you appear before a magistrate. You're entitled to a detention hearing. Now, is the government going to do that for the former president, where they know where he is every moment of the day? Probably not. But if they got in there and said, Judge, he's, the people are entitled to a speedy trial just as much as the defendant is. Mm-hmm. And we're ready to go because we've indicted him. And so let's go do this, within 70 days.
Well, is there anybody that's more of a flight risk than a multi-billionaire who's
got his own jet?
Exactly. So, that's one of the criteria, obviously.
Exactly.
Now, I get that. How hard would he be to track down? But not every place in the world has extradition agreements with the U.S.
Yeah, but most of the places that don't have extradition,
you wouldn't want to be.
They're freaking armpits of the world.
Well, right, exactly.
They are the armpits of the world.
It's probably less armpitish though if you have $5 billion.
If you want to go live in, I think there's a couple countries in Africa that don't have extradition treaties. Somewhere in over by Ukraine does, but over like in Ukraine. I mean, there are places you could go hang out for a while,
I wouldn't want to live.
but you wouldn't want to live there.
Right.
You wouldn't want to live
Right.
there for any length of time. And so that's clearly that cuts both ways for him. But if you got $1 billion or a couple billion like he supposedly does, you fly there and you land and you're like, hey, I can make myself pretty comfortable for the $1 billion that I have.
Mm-hmm.
But it certainly makes you look like you're guilty if you flee. That's for sure.
It absolutely does. And but do you think the court of public opinion really matters that much to Donald Trump?
No,
I don't either.
I think he just does what he wants to do and says what he wants to say. Let the consequences be damned. But once again, here you are. Any good attorney is going to say, don't do it. And if you read the indictment, there's 6 alleged co-conspirators. And I think half of them are attorneys. You think those attorneys? Now, here's the thing. You can say, well, it's political because you're alleging a conspiracy with 6 unindicted co-conspirators. Well, why aren't they indicted unless they've already cut a deal with the government to testify against Donald Trump?
Well, how did they get away from their attorney-client privilege?
You can't counsel somebody in the commission of an offense. You can't tell somebody this is how, it's one thing to say, hey, generally, if you were stopped for a DUI, do this, this, and this. But when they're actively plotting, as alleged in the indictment, to basically overthrow, the election, so to speak, one could say you're actually a part of the crime itself, not just giving legal advice. Because some of the attorneys withdrew and said, I'm not making that argument, which, that's what attorneys have to do. If they can't make an argument based in law and fact, they can't make it. They're not supposed to, at least ethically. But I know there's some people, but that's the difference that people don't get is there's a difference in politics where you think I can say anything I want, and going to court and actually saying it and being able to prove it. Like, because all the stuff they said, oh, we're going to overturn this election and we're going to do this, the counting and all that stuff. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to prove it. But just like elections, like in court, people like certainty. Why do you think, the United States is a relatively stable place. People invest their money here because the laws are such that they are. There's not supposed to be corruption. There's not supposed to be, we're not some third world country where you charge your opponent with crimes if you lose, or you don't want him to run against you, so you run it. You do that. So he's in trouble. He's in trouble for sure.
He is.
Now, just to be fair, because we're equal opportunists here, Hunter Biden, is that guy the biggest dirtbag you've ever seen in your life?
He is, and it just, yeah. He seems like a lot of the clients that we have that kind of live part-time on the street, that, just horrible decision after horrible decision. But the difference is, obviously comes from a much different socioeconomic background, but the same kind of behavior as
your regular street criminal.
He's
just a little more sophisticated because his dad just happened to be a senator all his adult life.
Yeah.
And dad covered all his mistakes. I mean, the guy got kicked out of the Navy for drug use. The guy went to Yale, for God's sakes. I think he went to Yale as well, or Harvard, one of the two. I think it was Yale. Usually you like to think those people are pretty stable, because when you go to Harvard and Yale, you have classes like, how to run the world 101, whereas we're still, counting on our fingers kind of thing. That's the people that are supposed to go there. And, but he is the epitome. And I think his dad is the epitome of what's wrong with politics, is that, they get in there, they want to loot the treasury and enrich their friends. That's what they do. And, some people refer to it as the Biden crime family. They're not wrong. And if that was you or me doing that, we would have been charged years ago.
Well, we were talking earlier about drugs, alcohol, and stupidity. And Hunter Biden,
he was a crackhead.
Kind of all three. at this day and age, especially if you have more than a couple $100 to your name, who takes a laptop in to get it repaired anyway? But like, if you know you have that on your laptop,
well, he probably knew he had something on his laptop that he needed. Well, I'll go get it fixed, but he's so dumb. Yeah, Frank said, I mean, he's just dumb. I mean, it's like the old days when they used to have the photomats. And, the guy worked at the photomat. I think we talked about this. It's like, hey, I'm developing these photos and they're all these inappropriate images. And they turn it over to the police and they wait for the guy to come pick up his photographs.
Well, I can
That's the equivalent of of Hunter Biden.
Well, I can equate that to modern day. Think of all the murder cases, gun cases, Palpo cases you have right now, where your client was nice enough to put a picture of them with a gun on Facebook.
Facebook is the greatest tool ever invented for law enforcement. That's literally the first place they go.
And for defense investigators, because that's the first place I go to find everybody. It's amazing.
And it's first thing, whether it's a personal injury case, a criminal case, the defense will usually tell you to close that account down, and the prosecutors will tell their witnesses, don't get on Facebook.
Yep.
It's the greatest law enforcement tool ever created, maybe second to the cell phone.
Yeah, even I don't do a lot of personal injury investigations, but I've had ones where I've found videos of the person not jet skiing, wakeboarding behind a boat.
Oh, my neck.
Exactly.
Except when I wakeboard. It's funny. All the pain goes away.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it just shows you human nature. Wow, is it already 7:44? Wow, we've been going an hour and 45 minutes. Wow. All right. Well, we got to go do our Patreon show. You're going to stick around for the Patreon show?
Sure.
Take calls?
Sure.
I think people would love to talk to us. Sorry we didn't get to more questions, but if you're a Patreon member, now would be the time to head on over to the Patreon link. If you're not a Patreon, now would be a good time to join. Not only do we give you cool stuff, but we get to do the Patreon show. And on top of that, you get to call in to our secret bat line number where we'll take your calls as well. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank our guest, Mark Carlson.
Thanks for having me.
It's always fun just to kind of sit around and talk, obviously about stuff that goes on, but kind of war stories of it. And
we kind of sit around in your office once in a while and have these same
conversations.
So.
Or we had to drive out to the Eastern Plains the other day. We had a good conversation.
Yes, we did
there as well. And it's I always tell people that, police officers, prosecution, defense, you probably have more in common than you think you do.
Absolutely.
Because we're all dealing with the same knuckleheads.
Yep.
And I mean that affectionately because, obviously my firm has a very strict policy. We only represent innocent people.
Sure.
As I know you do. You only represent
right.
agreed working cases where your client's absolutely innocent.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. All right. I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. Have a wonderful evening. If you're a Patreon, we'll see you there in a couple of minutes. If you're not a Patreon, well, now's a good time to join. Otherwise, have a wonderful night, and we'll see you next time on Crime Talk.